had no windows and no clocks, no shadows that suggested a sun. The light seemed to arise from understanding itself, gentle but unyielding. A circular table stood at the center like an altar to conversation, its wood scarred with marks that felt intentional rather than worn. That was the first thing Finn noticed when he arrived, though arrived felt like the wrong word. There was no door behind him when he turned, only a curved wall, the color of old parchment. The ceiling arched high above, lit by a gentle, sourceless glow, as if the light were thinking itself into being. At the center stood a round wooden table. 4 men were already seated in the 4 chairs. They did not look at Finn when he appeared, yet he knew he had been expected. The air vibrated with an unspoken question. No one spoke at first. A kettle steamed quietly on the table, its soft whistle the only sign that time was doing anything at all. Finally, the man in the tweed jacket, eyes bright with the knowing sadness of myths that never quite save us, leaned back and smiled as though he'd been waiting for decades. "Well," he said, voice warm and amused, "since we're here, we may as well begin." The 4 voices. They did not introduce themselves, but Finn knew who they were. The tweed-jacketed man, myth in his eyes, hero's journeys folded into his posture, was Joseph. Next to him sat a man in loose clothing, serene and playful, eyes bright with laughter that hadn't yet happened. Alan. Across from them, a tall, stern figure with piercing eyes and a notebook filled with symbols and sketches. Carl. And finally, closest to Finn, a man with sharp features, dark suit, and fingers steepled as if holding an invisible thought captive. Sigmund. The kettle whistled. Joseph spoke first. Joseph. The future as the calling. The question, Joseph said, is not whether you can live without a future. It's whether a human being can exist without a calling. He leaned forward. Every myth ever told begins with the same thing, a disruption, a sense that something lies ahead. Treasure, danger, destiny. It doesn't matter. What matters is the pull. Sigmund raised an eyebrow. You're describing desire. I'm describing meaning, Joseph replied. Without a future, even an imagined one, the hero never leaves home. No quest, no dragon, no transformation. Alan chuckled softly. And yet, he said, most people spend their lives chasing dragons that don't exist. Joseph smiled. That doesn't make the chase meaningless. Alan, the illusion of tomorrow. Alan poured tea into 4 cups, though no one had asked him to. You see, he said, sliding a cup toward Finn, the future is a thought. A useful one, but still a thought. The problem arises when people confuse the map for the territory. Sigmund snorted quietly. Alan continued. Can you live without a future? Of course you can. You already do. The future never arrives. Only the present does, again and again, wearing different costumes. Carl tapped his pencil. And yet the psyche projects forward constantly. Indeed, Alan replied. Just as the heart beats and the lungs breathe, but imagine mistaking breathing for the purpose of life. Joseph interjected. You're suggesting that the hero doesn't need a destination. Alan shook his head gently. I'm suggesting the hero is the destination. Silence settled for a moment, like dust in sunlight. Sigmund. Tomorrow is desire. Sigmund leaned forward now, eyes sharp. This conversation is far too romantic, he said. Human beings are not guided by myths or mystical presence. They are guided by tension. Tension between what and what? Carl asked. Between what is, Sigmund said, and what is wanted. He tapped the table. The future is a container for desire. Remove it and you remove motivation. Desire does not function in the present alone. It seeks satisfaction ahead. Alan smiled. Or it imagines satisfaction ahead. Sigmund ignored him. A person without a sense of future does not become enlightened, Sigmund continued. They become depressed, anxious, Neurotic, the ego requires anticipation to regulate the ID. Joseph nodded reluctantly. There is truth there. Sigmund turned to Finn. Tell me, he said, have you ever felt hope? Finn swallowed. Yes. And despair? Yes. They are the same mechanism, Sigmund said, just facing different directions. Carl. The future as symbol. Carl finally spoke at length. The future is not merely anticipation, he said. It is symbolic orientation. He opened his notebook, revealing a mandala, intricate, circular, endlessly layered. The psyche does not aim for events. It aims for wholeness. Joseph leaned in, intrigued. The future, Carl continued, is how the unconscious communicates direction, dreams, visions, goals. They are not predictions. They are messages. Alan nodded approvingly. Yes. Sigmund frowned. Or rationalizations. Carl met his gaze. If a man loses his sense of future, Carl said, he does not merely lose hope. He loses his story. And without a story, the psyche fragments. Joseph smiled softly. Myth again. Yes, Carl replied. Because myth is psychology told in the language of eternity. The argument deepens. The room seemed to expand as they spoke, the walls stretching slightly, as though ideas required physical space. Joseph stood. Without a future, there is no initiation, no return, no boon brought back to the tribe. Alan countered. Without presence, the future becomes a prison, Sigmund added. Without the future, civilization collapses. No planning, no restraint, Carl said quietly. Without the future, the unconscious screams. They turned to Finn. He felt the weight of their gaze. I don't know, he said honestly. Sometimes the future feels like oxygen. Sometimes it feels like suffocating. Alan smiled kindly. Exactly. A sudden interruption. The lights flickered, not dimmed, wavered, as if the room itself hesitated. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the table, the cups, and Finn's bones. Sigmund stood abruptly. What is that? The hum grew louder. Then, a spark. Blue-white electricity arced across the far wall, sketching impossible patterns in the air. The smell of ozone flooded the room. A figure began to form within the light. Tall, thin, intense, dark eyes burning with something between exhaustion and knowing. Joseph whispered, No. Alan laughed softly. Of course. Carl stared, transfixed. Sigmund said nothing. Nicola speaks. The figure stepped forward, electricity fading into silence. I've listened, said Nicola, to your discussion of the future. His accent carried the weight of continents. You speak of it as myth, illusion, desire, symbol. He looked at Finn. I lived my life almost entirely without it. They all froze. Nicola continued. I did not imagine retirement, legacy, comfort. I saw patterns, already complete, moving through time. Alan leaned forward eagerly. Ah, Nicola nodded. The future was not something I waited for. It was something I tuned into. Sigmund scoffed. You suffered greatly. Yes, Nicola replied calmly, but not because I lacked a future, because the world could not hear the present I was speaking from. Carl asked quietly. You had visions. I had clarity, Nicola said. The future is a crude word for resonance. Joseph asked, and meaning? Nicola smiled faintly. Meaning does not come from tomorrow, he said. It comes from alignment. He turned to Finn. You cannot live without a future if you believe life is a line. But if life is a field, then the future is already here and you are standing inside it. The room went silent. The electricity faded. Nicola dissolved into light. The final silence. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Alan raised his cup. Well, he said, that settles it rather beautifully. Joseph nodded slowly. Sigmund sighed. Carl closed his notebook. The walls of the room began to dissolve. Finn felt himself falling, not forward, not backward, but awake. Epilogue. When Finn opened his eyes, he was alone. There was no table, no chairs, no future waiting for him, only the present, quiet, humming, alive. And for the first time, it felt like enough. For a moment, he was seized by a sudden, irrational certainty. The future is a moment mechanism. That if he tried too hard to remember the room, he would lose something else, something stabilizing, something merciful. Not the room, but the pressure that had made the room necessary. As if the debate had never happened out there, only inside a moment where his mind had briefly stopped projecting forward, a moment where the future had loosened its grip. That night, as he drifted toward sleep, a final thought surfaced, not in words, but as a quiet certainty. If the room never existed, then neither did the exit. And somewhere, possibly nowhere, a kettle began to whistle.